Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
And welcome back. It's yet another edition of Talking Books and Writing and Stuff. We hope it's your favorite podcast. With us today on the line, award-winning writer, author, illustrator, and on, is Jon Klassen. He's in the West Coast, down in the California way. Started out in Winnipeg, grew up in Toronto, Niagara Falls. But we're here today to talk about The Skull. Well, first of all, Jon, thank you very much for joining us, taking some time out of your busy day to be with us today.
Oh, I was glad to hear from you. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, that's great. And this will be on now forever and ever up there in the universe. I have in front of me The Skull by Jon Klassen. It's billed as a Tyrolean folktale, but Jon, I understand you read a story similar to this a few years back, and then you came and sort of recreated it yourself. So there's a bit of an interesting story behind this story. Is that right?
Yeah, I didn't even really mean to do that. I did one of those things. I imagine most people can relate to this, but I read a version of the story really quickly in a library before I did a book event up in Juneau, Alaska. And then I put it back on the shelf and, left. And I kept thinking about the initial story, I thought, for like a year and a bit. And then finally I was kind of more preoccupied with it than I expected to be. And so I called the librarian up in Juneau and said, look, I read this book in your library and it had a story in it called The Skull. Is there any way you could find this for me? And sure enough, she did find it and she sent it over. And I read it, and in the, whatever it had been, year and a couple months, I had completely changed it without knowing that I had. I expected to read the story I had in my head, and instead I read a story that went very differently, at least, especially after the first section. And I had changed it completely, but I still remembered, what I thought I'd read. And I thought, I like that one. Let's do that one if you can. And so we did.
And there we were. Yeah, it's a Tyrolean folktale. What does Tyrolean folktale mean?
Tyrolean, I had to look this up a little bit too, just to make sure. It's a region of, I think it's mostly in Austria. It's kind of in northern Italy, Austria. That section of the mountains there, that section of the Alps, sort of a valley of people, and they have a very, very rich folk history and tradition. Kind of dark, not too far away from the old castles and vampire stories and things like that. But they have their own flavor of it, certainly. And I don't come from too far away from that if you go back far enough. And so it felt kind of homey to do one set around there.
And my wife and I, Diane, were talking about Tyrolean folktale, and she said, "What's a Tyrolean folktale?" And I said, "Well, all I know about Tyrolean is the hat with the little feather on it, and that's all I knew."
That's what, yeah, yeah. I know about those little hats too. They're nice.
Then that's about it. So, how did the whole process come about? Like, did you just sit down and do it all at once, or did the skull take a little while to sort of coagulate, if I can use that word?
For me, yeah, I think that's a good word. That's very descriptive of the process that it seems to take. For me, it took a minute because there's lots of things about this story that I've done some children's books, and I've illustrated some and written some, but never quite the way that this one's done. I've never narrated anything. All my children's books manage to avoid narration. They're almost all just dialogue, and that's sort of my crutch that I usually need to write anything, is that I've never liked the sound of my own narration, and I've always avoided it on purpose. And then also my stories have also been just about animals. I don't like talking about people, especially. It's kind of a weird hang up I have, I guess. I don't particularly seek them out in my stories. But this book, it had to involve narration, I thought. You couldn't do it with just dialogue. I tried and it doesn't work. And also it involves a little girl, and I hadn't done that before. And so writing all of that, setting it up so that I could feel comfortable writing all of that, it wasn't so much the mechanics of the story. I was pretty clear on that, but it was more just how do I write this thing? And that took some trial and error before I found a couple tricks that allowed me to do it.
Well, I think the opening few lines should go down in history as one of the best opening, most intriguing openings in the history of ever. It's one night, in the middle of the night, while everyone else was asleep, Ottila finally ran away. What? Right there, we're hooked. What the heck is going on here? What is there going to be more Ottila stories?
I don't know. I like her very much. People talk about their characters like that, and I'd never really gotten involved with my characters that much, where you would say, oh, I like this person, I like hanging out with them, about a person that you basically wrote about and made up. I didn't completely make her up, but I think my conception of her, I hadn't seen that before exactly. I think that that word finally really helped me out. I think there are a few different versions of this story floating around if you dig deep enough, and most of them start, I think, the way that fairy tales usually start when something like this happens. There's an evil stepmother or, a set of parents that weren't, kind of a Hansel and Gretel thing. Whatever it took to get her to run away, they usually put in there. And that's probably due to, how fairy tales evolve and these kinds of stories. Maybe it didn't start out that way, but maybe they just slotted them in. But for some reason, I thought we should take that out. I don't want to spend time with whatever she's running away from. And also, I think people's versions of why they might run away from home, both children and adults, are different, and they're very personal. And I didn't see what it added. I actually got really excited as soon as we took it out. As soon as I found the word finally, to be like, we can just say that. Then that powered the book for me. It made sort of what she does after that much more interesting. And solving it would have just, I think, watered it down a little bit.
Right, and that's great because, like I said, once the first 4 lines were in my brain, I went, okay, I have to finish this story. And we're talking about The Skull by Jon Klassen. It's out now, but apparently, Mr. Klassen, you're famous for something about the Hat series. What's that all about back there in the old days of 5 years, 10 years ago?
Yeah, it does go back a fair bit now. I have 3 picture books about hats and hat theft, or at least the idea of hat theft. And it came about pretty organically. The first book was called I Want My Hat Back. And it's a picture book. It's quite short, and it's about a bear who, when we meet him, has lost his hat, or at least it's gone. He doesn't quite say what's happened to it, but anyway, he wants it back. And he interrogates animal after animal as the pages go by, asking if anybody has seen his hat. And the animals, with sort of increasing pessimism, say they haven't seen any hats. But one of them is wearing a hat, and also goes on for much longer than the other animals, denying having seen any hats or stolen any hats, or please just don't ask me any more questions and move on. And that's a rabbit. But the bear is so much in the rhythm of the thing by then that he doesn't even bother to look. He's discouraged. He doesn't even really look at the rabbit. And so he keeps moving, and we keep moving, and the animals keep not having any answers for him until he lies down sort of near the end of the book, and he's very sad. No one's seen this hat as far as he's understood. And then someone comes up to him, a deer comes up to him and asks him a question. None of the animals have sort of followed up yet. They've all just said, no, I'm sorry. But this deer is like, well, let's work on this. What did your hat look like? Let's describe it, because he hasn't yet. We don't know what this hat looks like, even us as the reader. And the bear begins to describe it, and as he's describing it, he describes the rabbit's hat, the one that we've seen 10 pages ago. And he sits up, and the whole page goes red, and he dashes back. He says, "I've seen my hat." He has seen his hat, and he runs back, finds the rabbit. And then I use a nice trick I use a lot, where you turn the page and it skips over a certain amount of action. But the bear is just sitting there, now wearing his hat, and the rabbit is nowhere to be seen.
Yes.
And a squirrel comes up and finds the bear and asks him if he's seen a rabbit wearing a hat. And the bear verbatim uses the same speech that the rabbit has used earlier to deny having seen or stolen any hats, to say he has not seen or eaten any rabbits. And that's the end of that book. And I think the other 2 books aren't quite as dry as that one. We try to make it different for the different stories. But there was more to do there, I thought. The next one is about a thief, and it's sort of more of a monologue, more of a telltale heart kind of structure about a fish who stole a hat from a much bigger fish, and he's pretty sure he's going to get away with it, but the pictures all show a much bigger fish catching up with him as the book goes by. And then the third book is about 2 turtles who find one hat in the desert, and it's sort of, I took the start from a movie called Treasure of the Sierra Madre, where it's about, that movie's about, it's like 3 guys who find gold in the desert, right? And as soon as you do that, everyone looks at each other like, well, what are we going to kill each other? What are we going to do? Who gets this gold?
Yeah.
And that idea of like two animals coming across one thing in the middle of nowhere is just such a great start. But that book surprised me a little bit. It ended up I think a little bit more sweeter than the other two did. There's no murder. There's no complete solution either, but I really like where that one landed. It's a quieter one.
Yeah, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre with Tim Holt, Walter Houston, and Humphrey Bogart, one of the most famous...
Is it John Huston's first? It's not John Huston's first movie. Maybe it is.
I think John Huston directed it, one of his first, yes. And then, of course, the famous line about, we don't need no stinking badges.
That's the right one, yeah. It's great. A fantastic movie. I just love that premise of just like, the minute you find something out there you've been digging for the whole time, everyone kind of looks at each other like, all right, well, what now? And that's just such a great idea.
So that's the Hat trilogy that's out there. The Skull is out there now. You're an award winner. You've got the Governor General's Award, the Caldecott Medal, the Kate Greenaway Medal, lots of awards. How do you react to this praise that's heaped upon you? Do you go, oh, shucks, or do you think, oh, it can't be me, or do you go, well, thank you?
You try and combine all those. I think the internal reaction is something closer to the first few, where you don't want to internalize good reaction too much because it works on you, right? Both good and bad feedback works on you in ways. And what was that line? I think it was a Kipling line saying they're both imposters, kind of success and failure that way. Or to a certain extent, it's not about you. You try and make the books as good as you can, and however they react, you got to keep making books. And I think the initial one, that second Hat book I talked about with the fish, it won a lot of awards. The first one didn't. It got around, but the second one did. And I remember getting frozen up a little bit. You get nervous, even if you try not to. You're like, well, now I got to follow that up, and they're going to want other things. And no one's really keeping track of that but you. And so it can sit you down for a minute, and you've seen how it can sit you down. And so however well it goes, I can feel a certain amount of, resistance to watching it too closely, whether it goes well or badly, because the work is the important bit. You try and make the work, and also the children, the children are the audience here. And you have to remember that too, is that kids aren't really keeping track of that. Adults keep track of awards and accolades and reviews and all those things, but they're not the ones you're making it for. You're making it for the kids, and that's it. You have to keep remembering that. You have to keep remembering who's at the end of this pipeline.
Do you do readings with kids? Do you take your books out to various events and read them for an audience of 8, 9, 10-year-olds, or however?
Yeah, even younger than that. They give me like preschoolers and babies sometimes. And you really have to. That's a tricky thing, because those guys, first of all, they have to keep their attention in a very simple way. You have to just keep making sure that they're listening, and it's a real test for the book. Is your book interesting enough to keep a 2-year-old and an 8-year-old sitting there wondering what's going to happen? Because that's a pretty wide swath.
Yeah.
But also, if they don't like the book, they don't really register that you're the one who made it. They don't really understand emotionally what's on the line for you. If they stand up and say, I don't like this, I'm going home, like, they'll just walk out.
Right.
And that can destroy you in a way they don't intend. And so you try and keep a distance emotionally from the thing. But I've gotten better at that. I don't think I used to have a way with kids naturally. I didn't think it was part of this job. I thought you made these books in your house and that was the job. But it turns out they think you can actually sit in rooms with kids if you do this too. And so I've had to find my way through that. But it's not so bad. You can have worse gigs, I think.
And you've been involved in filmmaking, animation, the Kung Fu Panda. Lots of people will know that one. And you also did a music video for U2. How did that come about?
I did, yeah. Before I got into books, I went to school outside Toronto in Oakville, Ontario for animation. I thought that was going to be the job I had. And after I got out, I worked at the studios for a number of years. And one of the things I got involved with, I had a friend named David O'Reilly, who was from Ireland. And we worked together on some things. I liked his animation work, and so I did some design work for him. And then one day he calls me and he says, I have this thing came across my desk. It's a video for U2. Do you want to design it with me? And so I did the drawings and he did the animation, and it became a U2 video. It was a very strange experience because it was just the two of us. It wasn't this big giant production like you would think a band like that would demand. It was him in his room and me in my room, and we just sent each other the stuff, and that was the end of it. But it was great. It was really cool.
So did you ever meet the band at all, or?
I was supposed to. They came to Los Angeles, and David was here, and I was away on a book tour, it turned out. It was kind of last minute, and so I didn't even get the exciting bit at the end. I got to say I did the video, but we didn't get to meet him.
And you grew up in Canada, but now you're in Los Angeles. How did you get from one place to the other? Is that like a work permit kind of thing, or organic?
It was, yeah. When I got out of school, I went to school in Oakville, and I went initially to Vancouver to work at a television studio out there. And then while I was there, I'd gotten a storyboarding test at DreamWorks down here in Los Angeles, and I did it. And but I was nervous about doing it. I didn't want to send it in because all my friends had moved out to Vancouver. We had good jobs. It was very rare. We thought to get work right away like that, and it was a good position. But I'd never been to California. I'd never been on the West Coast besides Vancouver at all. And they offered me this job, and I thought, well, I may as well try it out. And that was 2005. And here I am. So I got married to a girl from down here, and here we are. Yeah, the books don't necessitate where you're supposed to live. So Canada is getting more and more attractive again. No one really cares where I hand these books in from. But on the other hand, in the middle of March, when you look at Los Angeles and you look at Toronto or something, it's not so bad.
Not so bad. Why do you do what you do? Why are you an illustrator and a writer? What is the inner desire or the drive for all of this?
I don't know. I think I think people expect it to be kids, and I'm not sure it's kids. I think that there's something about, I like that it involves children because they're an excellent audience, and they're very open-minded, and they're very honest, and it's a great joy to make stuff for them. But I think for me it started with, I like reduction. I like economy in design work and in illustration work and in storytelling. And the brief, if you get instructions on how to make stories for kids, number one is to simplify. And I like that brief. I like that instruction. And the reason to do that, my work always has come out simple. I don't think I've ever made anything that you couldn't show to a kid and hope that they understand it. And so I think it just sort of organically happened this way, where I like telling stories. I like communicating that way. I like the challenge of saying, did I get something across here? Even if it's vague, I think that my work increasingly is a little bit murky on what exactly its purpose is, because it's not to teach. I don't think that my books are in the business of teaching lessons or moralizing that much. And so it's not that. It's something about just a general communication and going through something in an entertaining way. It's tricky to come up with a new one when your instructions are so vague that way, and it usually takes a minute. But I think I just really like the challenge of communicating something very, very simply, and that's, I think, what keeps me in the work.
Well, it's like they always say, the most famous sentence in the English language, to be or not to be, has 7 words, and none of them are more than
4
3
syllables.
letters.
Yeah, how many words is that? Yeah.
Keep it.
I like that very much.
Keep it short and simple. That's what I always say.
I
won't give away your birth date or anything, but apparently you recently, you're just past the 40 age barrier. Did that have any kind of impact on you?
I think it took a minute. I'm past the 41 now, it turns out. And I think that first year didn't, because of COVID and everything, I think we all felt like we were sort of frozen 2 years beforehand, and so it didn't feel like it counted. But then physically, we've had kids. I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and those guys will make you feel like you passed the 40 mark even before you did. And so I feel it now, I think. But not especially. I think it's hard to measure. This work keeps you on your own a lot. You're in your room working on your books, and those things that you usually use to compare yourself to other people, whatever age they're at, you don't have those same things with this job. It's very solitary, and the different people you would compare yourself to professionally are all over the place. There's people making books who are in their 20s, and people making books still who are in their 70s, and no one has any idea where they're supposed to be. It's a really nice job that way, where it's hard to compare yourself to the next door neighbors that way. So I don't. Some days I feel it when I try to go for a run. I feel it, but in the work I don't feel it. I think we were having this talk the other day, where I think to a certain extent you have to have access to your grade 3 self when you make this stuff. You have to have a pretty clear pathway back, and I do. I don't know whether that's good or bad, but the way is very clear back there. And so whether that stunts you or just keeps you young in a positive way, the jury's still out. But at least it facilitates the work.
I'm glad you said grade 3, because we're inundated, of course, as you know, in Canada by U.S. stuff, and so people are now starting to say third graders instead of...
Third grade? No, I have to check myself, because when I say grade 3 over here, everyone kind of blinks and wonders what that is.
Yep.
They don't really know, especially. I try to hold on to that stuff as much. It's been a while since I lived up there.
Yeah.
But you hold on to the special things, for sure.
Exactly. So it's like, there's so many. I always call it a decal, but apparently in the US of A, it's a decal.
No, I always said decal too for the kit cards and stuff like that. They were always decals that went on.
They were decals, and
sure.
not a decal.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, but that's and it's insurance. It's insurance, not insurance. Anyway.
Oh, I hadn't heard that one. Yeah. I don't like that word regardless, but I and there's more insurance over here than there is up there, so you have to say it one way or the other. So you said the emphasis is on in, not sure.
Yep. Well, that's right. Well, we spend a lot of time. I used to live in Bellingham, Washington, south of Vancouver, and I grew up in Crescent Beach and White Rock. So,
okay.
Yeah, so I know a little bit of that. A bag instead of a sack and all that stuff.
I'm still getting used to Fahrenheit. It's been however many years, and I still can't figure it out. Yep. Fahrenheit is a tricky one.
And I'm the other way around. I'll say to my wife, "Oh, it's 74." She says, "No, tell me in Celsius." But in the winter time, in the winter, it's the opposite. She wants it in Celsius. Anyway, Jon Klassen. Depressing. Yep, Jon Klassen. What do you got next on your drawing table, or do you have a sort of a schedule?
I do. I usually, because by the time these books come out, you finished them a year ago at least, right? And so The Skull was finished last July. And so you have time to get into trouble again. And what I've got on the desk now is some board books for babies. As I say, when you do these events, even when we have kids, you're exposed to more babies than you thought you would be. And I think that hopefully the books are visually simple enough. Some of them are. This one I don't think is, to grab, a 10-month-old or something like that. But seeing them and seeing our kids be young, I got into board books more because they don't even have to be stories. Those board books for very, very young kids, they're not looking for a story idea yet. They're looking for some reason to turn the page maybe, but that's it. And that's a different idea. And so I'm interested in, quick 10 or 12 page board books, and I'm trying to figure them out. And so that's what's on the desk right now. I'm hoping to have them out in about a year.
And do you have a daily routine, or is it possible with your job, I'll call it, to have a daily routine?
It's not. Well, sections have routines. When you're writing, there's no routine. When you're trying to figure out the next thing and there's no shape to it, then all of life is chaos and it's terrible. You just it could happen at any minute, and you're hacking away at something. But the whatever the breakthrough is going to be could happen at lunchtime, or it could happen in the morning in a nice way, or it could happen in the shower when the day is done, or something horrible like that. So you just don't know. But once that's finished, once you think you have the shape of something, then the schedule begins, and it begins to relax. You can, if you have a page count, you can make a calendar to say, well, I want to get one page done every 2 days for the next 5 months, or something like that. And then the order sets in again. But then it's over. The book is over, and then you're back to your chaos again. And so there's seasons. But and there's good things about the chaos seasons too. It's exciting to think that you don't really know what you're going to make yet. But it's also nice to have order when that part's done.
We have had a special pleasure today of talking with Jon Klassen. The book is The Skull. These days, do you have a website?
I don't these days. It got hacked. I had one many years ago, but they started selling. Someone took it over and started selling some sort of horrible medical products on it, and so I had to take it down, and I'm building a new one. I have an Instagram that's just my name. If anyone's on that, it's just Jon Klassen, and you can find me there.
And it's Klassen is Jon and Klassen. Well,
Correct.
Thank you very much for taking time out from the drawing board and the kids and everything to speak with us. And this will be going up sometime in the near future. We have no idea because we're so far ahead, which is good. And again, thank you very much and continued good luck.
I had a wonderful time. Thanks so much for having me on. Anytime. Thank you.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.